So sorry. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us this morning and for your interest in the 2022 municipal election. This information session is hosted in partnership between the City of Elliot Lake and the Town of Blind River. My name is Natalie Bray, and I'm the Director of Clerks and Planning Services. With me this morning is Amanda Lawrence, Deputy Clerk, and John McDonald, Election Coordinator. In attendance from the Town of Blind River is Katie Scott, Clerk CAO. We ask that you keep your microphones muted and cameras turned off at this time. Your invitation sent out yesterday had information about the question period, which will take place after Mr. Dean gives his presentation. If you wish to ask a question, please use the raise hand feature and I'll call on your display name. And at that time, you can turn your camera on if you wish and ask your question. Once your question has been asked and answered, please remute and turn off your camera. If you prefer, you can email your question to the city's Deputy Clerk, Amanda Lawrence, or to Pam Walsh in Blind River, and she will forward your questions to Mr. Dean to be answered. So just a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the city's website by the end of next week. To introduce our presenter, Fred Dean is a lawyer who acts exclusively for municipalities across Ontario and municipal associations. He works with elected officials and senior staff, giving them tools to make effective decisions on behalf of their communities. He has been one of the facilitators training members of council and heads of council on behalf of the Association of Municipalities since 2002. And so with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Dean.
Thanks, Natalie. Let's see if we can get the PowerPoint up. Okay, let's go. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking a Saturday morning to spend a bit of time talking and learning a little bit about municipalities and municipal councillors and what's involved in being on council. We're going to take probably about an hour and a half. Sometimes it's longer, closer to 2 hours, but we'll see. It depends on the number of questions at the end of the session. The one thing that I should mention is I am a lawyer, but I'm retired from practice. I decided to give up practice after 40 some years, a couple of years ago. So I'm doing, mainly what I'm doing now is working with municipalities and doing these sessions and working with heads of council as well on issues related to the municipality and administration. If you're thinking of running for council, I want to congratulate you, because I think even giving thought to it, giving time to your community is a really important step. And it's one that I think you need to have a little bit of background and a little bit of understanding in terms of what's involved. There are a lot of misconceptions, in my experience, in talking to people who are thinking of running. And hopefully I can give you a better sense of what's involved, what commitments are required, and what skills you need to bring to it to be effective. So this is what I want to do today, this morning, and I'm going to do what I call Municipal Government 101, which is fairly technical and detailed. Usually takes between a day and several days to work with municipal people in going through this, but I'm going to try and do it in about 7 minutes. And just to give you a sense and an overview of how municipal government right across the province operates. There are 444 municipalities in Ontario, and they operate in different ways, but with the generally same set of powers. We'll talk about how they get those powers in a little while. So we'll talk about municipal powers, and then we're going to talk about accountability and transparency and what that means in terms of local government. I have to tell you that local government in Ontario is the most accountable and most transparent level of government that we have. If it used to be found on the provincial website that indicated that decisions made by cabinet were confidential and were not available to the public. That's not the case in the municipal council context. So we'll spend a bit of time talking about what it means to be accountable and what it means to be transparent. I get the opportunity to work with municipalities all over Ontario throughout the term. And often I get a call because the municipality is having some difficulties. And often those difficulties revolve around the issue of who is responsible for doing what within the organization. And I call it roles and responsibilities. So we'll spend some time because I think it's important, if you're thinking of running for council, to understand what the job is that you're applying for, and what the responsibilities are, and what the responsibilities of other people in the organization are. We'll then spend a few minutes on personal considerations, things that to think about if you are elected in your personal life, but then we'll take personal considerations into the context of codes of conduct and conflict of interest, and also confidentiality. And we'll spend some time on that. And I want to finish today and just talk a little bit about, as an example of the regulatory nature of the services provided, I want to talk a bit about the delivery of water and responsibilities of members around that. So we're going to cover quite a bit. One of the things I often do, and I'm not going to do it today, but if I'm doing these sessions in person, we spend about 10 or 15 minutes putting together a list of what local government does for the community. And I encourage you to take a piece of paper after this is over, sit down with a coffee and make a list. And if you get to 75 things that municipalities do in your community, you've done pretty well. It's well over 100, by the way. But it covers a broad scope of activities, a number of recreational facility activities, programming fields, number of things around roads. Roads do a lot of different things for the community. Break that down: water and water collection, potable water, and sewers. Services also provided by what are called local boards. And the best example I can give you is the library. If a municipality wants to have a public library system, council cannot operate that system. The province says that public libraries must be operated by a public library board. Now, it has a relationship. It's a separate corporation from the municipality, but it has a relationship with the municipality. In fact, all the different local boards, TSAB, police services, conservation authority, health units, all have a relationship with the municipality, and they're all different based on the provincial legislation that authorizes them. Municipalities do a lot of other things around, for example, zoning and planning. They're pretty big issues, particularly when you get into the Greater Toronto area. Zoning and planning takes up a considerable amount of time for every municipal council that is in that general area. The list goes on, but that's a starting point in terms of what municipalities do. And I think it's important to do that to give you a sense of the scope and the breadth of the responsibilities that fall onto council. And many of the activities that you will identify on the list are ones that are highly regulated by the province, sometimes by the feds, and the municipalities are providing services that have to fit within all of those various regulations. So it's a complex responsibility that comes with being a member of council, and council members need to have excellent advice coming to it, and we'll talk about how it gets that advice in just a little while. So let's talk about municipal powers just for a few moments. All of the powers that a municipality has comes from the province. You probably heard the expression municipalities are entities of the province, and that's true. And it was proven true again in the City of Toronto case, where the province reduced the size of council in 2018 from 45 or 6 down to 25, and did that in the middle of the campaign. And there was a court challenge that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. At the end of the day, the court said that the province had the ability and the authority to be able to do that because the municipalities were created by the province. So there's no inherent jurisdiction. Municipalities can't just do whatever they want to do. They have to be able to source back the authority before they undertake an activity. So that's really fundamental. And often council members, sometimes new council members, want to get into things that are not within the scope of the municipality, and there has to be some care taken that they not get into matters that are beyond the jurisdiction and scope. Before 2001, there was a municipal act, and it had not been rewritten for 150 years. But it was rewritten in 2001, and there were a lot of changes. Pre-2001, municipalities were given powers from the province based on size. And you could tell their size pretty much by their name. There were villages and townships and towns and small cities and big cities. And as municipalities got larger, the powers increased. That all disappeared in 2001. And now in Ontario, there are 3 kinds of municipalities. The first is single tier, and you're single tier. In fact, every municipality in Northern Ontario is a single tier municipality. And that means that the bundle of powers that the province gives is given to all single tier municipalities. So your municipalities here today have the same powers as, say, City of Kingston or City of Ottawa. So that was a significant change. There are 2 other kinds of municipalities, and these are in the south. There are upper tier municipalities, and these are counties and regions and District of Muskoka. And under those upper tier municipalities, there are local or lower tier municipalities, the towns, the townships, the cities that fall within the geographical area. In those cases, the powers that are given by the province are divvied up. They're split between the upper tier and the lower tier, and it differs around the province. So we don't need to spend time in terms of the powers coming. Our interest is the fact that we're single tier, and as is all of Northern Ontario. When the new act came out in 2001, it put a section in, it contained a section, section 5, and it's a very short section, but it's, I think, maybe the most important section in the act. And it says this, that all powers of a municipality shall be exercised by council. And when you see the word shall, that's mandatory. There's no discretion. All powers shall be exercised by council. And it goes on to say that those powers shall be exercised by bylaw. So you trace back, again, exercise of power in municipality to a bylaw of council. If someone is doing something, you trace it back to an exercise, a bylaw that was passed by council. So that's a really important principle. Notice it doesn't say by council members or by the mayor or by staff. It says shall be exercised by council by bylaw. And when we come to that, the powers have to be exercised at what I call a duly constituted meeting. And there are a number of principles that fit within that concept of a duly constituted meeting in order to pass a bylaw. The first one is you, as a municipality, must tell the public when a meeting is about to be held. And it has to tell the public for regular council meetings and special ones, has to tell the public and give notice for committee meetings, and it has to give notice whether the meeting is open or closed to the public. The expectation is the public has the right to know when a meeting is being held. And that notice will contain the agenda and the materials that are to be deliberated by the council or by the committee, so that people are aware in advance what decisions council is being asked to make or consider, committee is going to consider. The second part of the duly constituted meeting to pass a bylaw is that the meeting must be open to the public. That's important, and it's true both whether it's live in person in the council chamber or via the internet, Zoom or whatever. The meeting must be open to the public, and the public has the opportunity to observe. In fact, the courts have said the primary purpose, primary reason for the public at council meeting is to observe, to be able to watch the meeting and watch how decisions are being made. That's a really fundamental process, a really fundamental concept. So municipality has to tell the public it's holding a meeting, and the meeting has to be open to the public. The next part is that there must be a quorum present. And I'm going to, I'll give you an example, but I'll base it on a council of 5, because I can kind of keep track of one hand what the principles are. Quorum is a majority of the members. So if all 5 members are present, there's a quorum and a meeting can take place. If 3 members are present, that's also a quorum and a meeting can take place. If there are only 2, you don't have a meeting. There's no meeting that will occur. The act then goes on and says that the things are passed by way of majority vote. So again, if all 5 members are present, the majority in order to pass a bylaw is 3 members. 3 members must vote in favor of it in order to pass the bylaw or to pass put a motion, become a resolution. If you only have 3 members present, we know that's a quorum. In order to pass something with a quorum of 3, 2 have to vote in favor of it, which is interesting because that's less than the majority of council, but those 2 have exercised the power on behalf of the corporation. The final thing is that all members vote. That includes the head of council, which makes I think the responsibilities of a head of council interesting and challenging. So that's the outline, if you will, of how council exercises power. It does so by telling the public in advance of the meeting what's going to be on the agenda, by being open to the public, having a majority of the members present, and by passing items by having a majority vote of those who are present. And finally, everyone votes. So let me give you some examples of accountability and transparency, because I think it's important to have a sense, if you are running, that what has to be done in public. And the first element of accountability and transparency is, just as I've said, meetings have to be open to the public. There is a limited ability to hold meetings behind closed doors. And the rules around that are set out in the Municipal Act. And it falls into really 3 categories that municipalities have to take into account when they're considering a closed meeting. First is the subject matter. There's a limited number of subject matters that council or committees can go into a closed meeting to deliberate. The municipality must fall within one of those categories in order to hold a closed meeting. The second is, how does the council get into a closed meeting? Well, it does so by telling the public. It passes a resolution at a public meeting saying it's going to hold a closed meeting. And it also has to indicate the general nature of the matter and the matters that are going to be discussed. The third element of closed meeting is there are restrictions on what council can do at closed meetings, the types of votes that can be taken. So all of these elements, when you put them together, the starting point is meetings shall be open to the public. Staff, whenever they're putting agendas together, that's their starting point. Then if there's something that needs to be put in a closed session, then it has to be the proper subject matter, and then the various rules to get into and what can be done at the meeting come into play. Other examples of accountable and transparent government are council policies, and there are a whole bunch of them. I've got most of them here. There's some others, but there's a couple of them I want to point out to you that I think are worthy of taking a look at. Every municipality must have an accountability and transparency policy. How is the municipality attempting to ensure that it's accountable and transparent in how it makes decisions? If you're thinking of running for council, I urge you to take a look at that policy. Have a look and see what elements go into the organization as being transparent and accountable. It's a really good document. It's one of the two documents I'm going to suggest you take a look at before you consider putting your name in. The other policy I want to mention quickly, and the last two in the list, but the one I wanted to mention is the province has introduced relatively recently the requirement for all municipalities to have a council member staff policy. Notice it doesn't say council staff policy, it's individual council members and staff. And it deals with the relationship between council members and staff, and it is tied into the council members' code of conduct. So it's another policy you may want to have a look at to see, again, what that relationship is. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we get farther into the material this morning. So all of those policies have to be in place and they have to be maintained. So there are a lot of them, and they have a real impact on how the community sees local government, and a lot of them are the attachment between the community and local government. For example, the purchasing policy, how municipalities acquire goods and services is a really important link to the community, if you will. So it becomes important. So all of these are examples of a government that has to and is required to be both accountable and transparent in the decisions that it makes. So I said before that roles and responsibilities are a significant part of local government. And understanding and respecting the respective roles, I think, is absolutely critical. Organizations that function really well, both the staff and the members of council understand their respective roles and respect the responsibilities of other people within the organization. It's really important. I said that municipalities were creatures of the province. Well, the province has put in what I call job descriptions. And we're going to take a look at three of them. We're going to look at the job description for council, and for the head of council, and for staff. And I think it's important to get a sense of what the expectation of the province is in terms of members of council and in terms of what staff are obligated to do, and the very different role of a head of council. So let's start with council itself. council, in a sense, is like a board of directors of this municipal corporation. Municipalities are corporations. They're not business corporations, but they are corporations in law. And council, as we saw before, exercises corporate powers. That's where the corporate powers rest with the municipality. Council is the decision maker. Council sets policy. The Act goes on to say that the council represents the public. There's no surprise in that. Members of council understand that they are dealing with the public, they're talking to the public, they're hearing from the public, and those discussions and conversations end up at council, with council at the end of the day representing the public. The third bullet point is an interesting one. And it says that council has to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. And municipality, I think you have to look at in two contexts, in two different meanings. First is geographical boundaries. You're a municipality. There's an obligation to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality and the people within the municipality. But it also means the well-being and interests of the municipal corporation. Members of council, just like staff, have a duty to act in the best interest of the municipal corporation. That's true in the legislation, the Municipal Act, but it's also true in the contracts that municipalities have for insurance. Insurance requires that council and staff of a municipality act in the best interests of the municipal corporation. So it's a pretty fundamental concept, if you will. As we've seen earlier, council acts collectively, that is by majority vote. You must do so in a public way, and you have to tell the public you're holding a meeting and what the items are on that agenda. So it's really fundamental in terms of the community having an opportunity to observe the decisions that council are making. There's nothing in the Act, there's nothing in any Act that gives a management role for members of council. The Act, in my opinion, is clear. The day-to-day management and the management of the operations rests on the administrative side. And we'll see how that is structured in just a couple of minutes. So if you're thinking that you're going to run for council because you want to be able to direct staff and order that things get done, you don't have the authority. It's not within the scope of the job. And in fact, if you start doing that, you're going to create huge problems within your organization. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a while from now, but just for now, there are no management responsibilities for members of council. The other thing to keep in mind is the powers of a council member rests at the council table. And as part of this collective body, as part of voting to make decisions on matters that come before council. There are limited powers on individual members. I talked about micromanagement. I also suggest that, for example, council members don't have access to all the documents within a municipality. They're limited to the documents that are necessary to be seen to fulfill their mandated role. So there are limitations that go with the responsibilities of a member of council. Remember back to 2001, before that new act came into effect, throughout the province and all the legislation, there were mayors and reeves and wardens and chairs, and they were all determined by the type of government it was. So reeves represented villages and townships, and mayors were towns and cities. Wardens were the head of council for a county, and chairs are the head of council for regional governments. In 2001, those terms were all removed from the Municipal Act, and what was left was the term head of council. And so now the powers given to the head of council, no matter what type of municipality it is, are all the same. So the powers of a mayor or the reeve or the warden or the chair are identical in the legislation. In fact, the act is now clear that council can change the title, if it wishes, of its head of council. Renfrew County, over in the Ottawa Valley, a number of years ago now, decided that the title of reeve didn't have the international or national acceptance and respect for the office as the title of mayor. And so councils had the authority and did so. They changed the title. And how did they do it? They passed a bylaw, which is exercising the power. So the title of reeve is slowly disappearing across the province. There's still some, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be. And it doesn't indicate anymore the type of or size of municipality. There's one exception to all these traditional names, and that there is a Lord Mayor, interestingly, and that is the head of council in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And they received that authority, the municipality of Niagara-on-the-Lake, by way of a private member's bill back in the, I think it was the 80s. And I think it ties into the Shaw Festival. So they have a Lord Mayor. Today, if a municipality wanted to change the title of the head of council, its head of council, it could do so by passing a bylaw. So they expanded the powers, if you will, in 2001. So when I'm talking about heads of council, I'm talking about head of council in your municipality, whether it's a mayor or different. And I think in both your situations, it is a mayor. First obligation under the Act is the head of council presides over council meetings. That's been in the Act for a long time. The wording in the Act is much more detailed and talks about conducting efficient and effective meetings. Being a head of council, if you're thinking of running for a head of council, is a very different responsibility than being a councillor. It's a very different view of the world, in my opinion, sitting in the mayor's chair than it is sitting in a councillor's chair. The responsibilities are significantly different in a number of ways. The Act makes clear that the head of council provides leadership to council. It doesn't say to the municipal organization, it says to council. And we'll see how the leadership on the administrative staff side is put in place in a few minutes. So this leadership element has a number of different aspects to it, but the expectation is that the head of council provides leadership to council. Unlike other members of council, unlike councillors, the head of council speaks on behalf of the municipality. That's significant. So how would the mayor know what to be speaking on behalf of the municipality? Well, it's based on the bylaws or the resolutions passed by council. The municipality exercises power and speaks through bylaws and resolutions, and the mayor has an obligation to speak on behalf of the municipality. And that's a responsibility given solely to the mayor. Part of the leadership, the head of council provides information and recommendations to council on a series of things. And council has to give consideration to these things as well. And you can see administrative controllership and accountability and transparency. Again, that's all part of providing leadership to the council itself. So that's an overview of the head of council, but there's another element to it. The head of council in Ontario, the Municipal Act says, acts as the chief executive officer of the municipality. Now, if you're from a business background, you're going to say, oh, wait a minute, the CEO is responsible for day-to-day management. And that's right, but that's not correct in the municipal context. And the province decided to clarify this a number of years ago now. And it put in a section in the Act that said, here are the responsibilities of the mayor or the head of council as the CEO, Chief Executive Officer. And if you read those through, two things stand out. Firstly, it really defines the role of a CEO as the champion of the municipality. I refer to it as a champion or a cheerleader of the municipality. What it makes clear is there's no day-to-day management responsibilities or duties as a result of being the CEO. The equivalent of a business CEO in the municipal context is the chief administrative officer, and we'll come to that in just a moment. So head of council has responsibilities around speaking on behalf of council, chairing meetings, leadership to council, acting as the champion of the municipality, but does not have any day-to-day management duties or responsibilities. So where do they rest? Well, they rest with the Chief Administrative Officer, the CAO, and that's a person who is appointed by bylaw, and the responsibilities are set out in the bylaw. It must contain provision that the CAO is responsible for general day-to-day management. There's another position that there are a number of positions in the municipality that are called statutory officers. And these are ones that council appoints by bylaw, and the responsibilities are set out in provincial legislation. One I want to mention to you, if you're considering running for council, is the clerk. The municipal clerk is a statutory officer. And if you have questions around the election, clearly that's who you're going to be talking to. But if you have questions as a member of council or with issues around meetings and some of the issues at meetings and what you have to have a sense and understanding of, or how agendas are put together, the clerk is the person to talk to. And in my experience, clerks throughout the province are there to help you, assist you in terms of achieving the goals that you want to achieve. The clerk, in effect, becomes the primary advisor on procedural matters to council. The CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer, is the primary resource for policy information and information generally from the administration to council. So here's what is in the Municipal Act around municipal staff. The first bullet point is a really important one, and it says staff have an obligation to undertake research and provide advice to council. So what does that mean? Undertake research. Well, that means the reports get written, staff writes reports to council, they're in writing, and the advice to council is the recommendation within those reports. And my suggestion always is that the recommendation be in the form of the motion that council is being asked to consider, to vote upon. So we see here that council has an obligation to receive this advice, and that the staff become the primary resource of information to council and to the matters that are placed before council at the meetings. Once council makes a decision, passes the bylaw, passes the resolution, staff have an obligation to implement council's decisions. So that's that management side, if you will, under the general supervision of the Chief Administrative Officer. So the process, staff prepares the reports and the documents and the recommendations, council deliberates, makes decisions, and staff implements those decisions. And that's the fundamental flow, if you will, of local government right across the province. The Act also provides that staff establish policies and procedures. Why? Well, to carry out council's decisions. Again, this is reinforces this decision-making role of council. These practices and procedures are manuals for how each department gets things done. They aren't council policies, they are administration. Every department has some, and it's how they make decisions around when the plows come out, when the grass gets cut, when the culverts get cleaned out, things around the election, all sorts of various things, how the agendas get put together. Council rarely sees these. There's no need to. They are just the day-to-day operating documents of municipal staff, and every department has them. I've used this slide for a lot of years, and I debate every time whether to leave it in, because it's based on a book called Reinventing Government by Osborne and Gabler, which is way back, I think, in the 70s. But I like the image, so I leave it in. Council should steer the boat rather than row it. Council sets the direction, council sets the policy, council makes the decision, and staff have the responsibility of how to implement that, how to make the ship move forward in the direction that council sets out. It's a good image, and it's one that really, I think, again, defines the roles between staff and council. When I talk about municipal governments, I'm talking about how council makes decisions and what governance model it has in place to allow it to make decisions. And I just want to cover off a few of these items. We've seen today on the previous slide that council, the primary source of information for council is staff, and the province designated that, and it's, in my experience, true right across the province. Staff, the council should be looking to staff for advice, for recommendations, not only in the formal context of the meetings and the meeting agenda, but also if a member of council has some questions and is looking into a specific item, take it to staff and get some research. Remember, I talked about the complexity of local government and the types of activities that council is responsible for. That requires a dedicated research and information to be provided. There's no expectation that members of council are going to be experts on all the various activities that the municipality undertakes. But staff have an obligation to provide the advice or to seek assistance from outside to get that advice to council to make a decision. The better advice council gets, better decisions council will make. Another source of advice to council is a committee system. And every municipality in the province has a somewhat different committee structure. There's similarities, but in most places there are differences. Council can create committees. Council has the authority to create committees. And the primary reason council creates committees is to provide advice to council, to have a body making recommendations to council on a specific topic or a specific series of topics. When council creates a committee, it sets the mandate. Committees don't set their own mandate. Council sets the mandate. And council populates the committee, names the members to it. So committees are there to provide advice to council, to assist council in this responsibility of making decisions and setting policy. The public, in terms of municipal governments, plays a significant role as well. In the meeting context, the public has the ability to appear before council based upon the rules that council sets. Council gets to write the rule book. The procedure bylaw of the municipality is a council bylaw that sets, it does a number of things, and I'll come to that in a minute, but it sets the rules, including the ability of the public to appear at council meetings or at committee meetings. There's no inherent right of the public to come and speak at a council meeting or participate in a council meeting unless it is given by council within the procedure bylaw itself. It's an important element. Council has, the members of council have been elected to be the governing body. The responsibility is to get advice, and when the public comes forward as a delegation, the public, that delegation is providing advice to council, making recommendations. I talked about local boards as being entities that are connected to the municipality but are independent. Each have a different relationship, and each are undertaking specific responsibilities that are not within the purview of council itself. So they're in place. One of the realities of being on council is you better love meetings. I mean, you better really love meetings, because if you don't, you're going to have a miserable 4 years. And you better get good at it. There's some real skills around being effective at meetings. You need to get some training in terms of how to be effective at meetings. And you need to understand that your life is going to be taken up with a considerable number of meetings. Being on council does not mean 2 council meetings a month. It means council meetings every month. It means committee meetings, depending on the committees that you happen to be on. If you're on local boards, that's going to take time. And if you're on ratepayers, various activities within the community groups, you're going to be doing that as well. So the expectation is that you better really love meetings, and you better be good at it, because that's a large part of what your responsibility is. Because meetings, as I've said before, council meetings are where the decisions are made, where the policy is set. I mentioned the procedure bylaw. This is the other document I think you really need to take a look at if you're thinking of running for council. It is mandatory. Municipalities have a procedure bylaw, and it does a bunch of things. It sets out the rules for the meeting itself, and it has pretty broad discretion. The province sets some of the rules that for example, around voting, but the municipal council gets to write the rule book in terms of the procedures. But it does a whole much more. It defines relationships at council between council members, councillors and the mayor, between the council and staff, and between council and the public. It plays a really significant role. It determines the governance model, what committees you're going to have, and what the mandate of those various committees might be. It's a really significant, really important document, in my opinion, that has to be paid attention to. The other thing it does is it governs conduct of people at meetings, not only members, but everyone else. And it plays a pretty significant role, I think, in the success of a municipality. Often when I'm called in to work with a municipality that's having some difficulties, I'll read their procedure bylaw in advance. And I can usually tell, I've been reading these for a long time, how trouble and difficulties are being created, because it's creating conflicts amongst the members or amongst the staff and council or the public. So I urge you to take the time, read it through, get a sense of what's involved. And if you have questions about it, the person to talk to and the person to ask is the clerk. So I want to just change directions a little bit here and talk about how your life will change the day you're elected. most people who win the election are pretty much on cloud nine, and they have this view of the world that everybody loves them. That won't last. But they will be treated differently from day one. From the day you are elected, people will look at you, people will treat you differently, people will talk to you differently. And that includes some family, that includes friends, that includes people just on the street. People will want to talk to you. They'll want to share their ideas with you. They'll want to complain to you. And many people will believe that you can solve all their problems. You can't, but that belief will be there. So be prepared to be communicating with people on a regular basis. Being a member of council is a 24/7 commitment. You will be getting calls and information at all hours. People will reach out to you at unusual times to talk to you about something if they're particularly excited about a particular aspect, positively or negatively. So it's 24/7. You cannot escape it. If you walk down the street, particularly in smaller communities, everybody knows who you are. That's not true in larger communities. I live in Toronto now, mainly because it makes it easier for me to get around the province. But I can tell you, in my ward, the councillor represents over 70,000 people. Do you think everybody knows who the councillor is or would recognize him? Not a chance. But that's not true. In smaller communities, people know you, and you are accessible to them on a regular basis. So this council role, this being a councillor or head of council, requires total commitment. You need to make the decision before you put your papers in that you are going to be totally committed towards this new responsibility. And I think it's so important. I'm a huge respect for members of council who are acting with integrity and trying to make their communities better places to be, but it requires a total commitment. One of the interesting things I do is I chat with people who have left the municipality. Either they're not on council anymore, or they are staff who have retired after been with the municipality for a long time. I usually try and talk to them about 6 months after they've left and ask them how life is different. And they all respond the same way. And that is, they said, I had no idea how much this municipal government, being part of it, consumes you. It just takes over your life in every aspect. Take that into consideration. It's really important to do. I debate whether to share a story with you, which I call two-tier, but I think I will, because it made a really powerful impact on the people when this was made. I was doing a session similar to this. This is at least 10 years ago in Eastern Ontario. And keep in mind, Eastern Ontario, two-tier. So it had, in that situation, there was a town and then a county. And one of the things that happens in the two-tier, if you are elected mayor of your municipality, of your town, that automatically puts you on county council. So this gentleman who spoke at this session had been on council. He was a councillor, and he told the story. He said, I decided to run for mayor. And election day came, and he won. He won. He went home to his wife, and he said, I won. I'm the mayor. And his 8-year-old son came out, and the father said, I won. I'm the mayor, and I'm going to be on county council. And the 8-year-old looked at him and he said, I guess I lost. And he said in that moment, he realized he had to reevaluate his commitment to family and commitment to local government. that the son felt by having an extra level of government and the more time involved in being mayor, that he was going to lose out with his dad around. It was a pretty compelling moment in terms of his impact. He said he really had to redefine his relationship, both family and community. So one of the things I always recommend if you're thinking of running to council, is talk to your significant other, because they get involved as well, to the extent that they're going to be fielding phone calls. People are going to be talking to them when they go to the grocery store or elsewhere in the community. It has an impact on them. Have a conversation about how to deal with phones and internet at home when you have children, and how to deal with that. I think this election is going to be held on social media more so than we've ever seen before, and I think that's a conversation that you need to have as well. How are people going to be commenting on you that your family is going to be aware of? Your family interacts with the public, as I say, whether it's out in the community or on the internet, at the grocery store. It can be anywhere. People will believe that they can stop and talk to you and spend some time. It takes a lot longer, and what councillors tell me, to go shopping when you're on council than it did before they were elected. I talked earlier about loving meetings and the fact you're going to spend a lot of time in meetings. The other reality is you need to take into consideration preparation time. This is huge. All those council meetings and all those committee meetings and those other boards and agencies all prepare agendas. You'll get a lot of paper, either hard copies or on a screen to read. There's a lot of it. And the expectation is that you will have read it all for every meeting you're going to. And here's why. There are two reasons. First is the expectation everybody has is that you will be prepared for the meeting. And if you haven't read the material, you aren't prepared. So you need to spend the time doing that. When I was in Sudbury, council members in those days used to spend Sundays. They committed a large portion of time on Sundays to reading agendas, to getting ready for the upcoming meetings. There's another reason why you want to be reading every piece of paper on every agenda that's going to council or committee. You need to be looking for conflicts, pecuniary interests, because they may be buried somewhere in that material. And you need to be aware if there's one in there that you didn't know was going to be coming to council. So there's an obligation on you to take the time, considerable amount of time, and prepare. Be ready for the meetings and understand if you may have a pecuniary interest buried in one of those items. So meetings become a really significant part of your life, and not only the meeting itself, but the preparation around it and the reaction of the community after the meeting, particularly on some high profile issues that are going to get people's attention, and they're going to want to talk to you, and they're frankly going to want to talk to your family. And I saw this over and over in my time in Sudbury. So I just want to mention these three, and this is kind of a kickoff slide to some other material. I mentioned micromanaging and the importance that you avoid micromanaging. It will have a huge impact on your organization. You need to stay away from it. It's not your responsibility. It is a real problem for staff. And there are things that are now being done. I mean, I mentioned that policy earlier between council members and staff. It's an item that will be dealt with in your code of conduct. It's important to understand you are not being elected to be managers. You're being elected to be decision makers and policy setters. Incivility is an issue in some communities. It's been there forever, but it's coming to light in some communities, particularly through codes of conduct. It can have a huge impact on your organization. I want to talk about confidentiality in a few minutes and just some of the issues around that. And then I want to spend a few minutes now talking about personal responsibility. So I want to touch on the code of conduct, conflict of interest legislation, and the delivery of safe drinking water. So let's go through these items quickly. Up until a few years ago, there were a few municipalities that had council code of conduct. And these are codes of, when we talk about this, we're talking about codes of conduct for members of council. Few municipalities had them, and they had an officer called an integrity commissioner who, when a complaint came in, would do an investigation and report to council. And the codes were all different. They were all over the map, but there weren't a lot of them. Just a few years ago now, the province announced that every municipality, all 444, would have to have a council code of conduct and an integrity commissioner. And it provided that the scope of the responsibilities for the integrity commissioner would be expanded. And still the power to investigate alleged breaches and to report and recommend to council, but also an obligation to educate on the code and on ethical behavior generally, educate members of council and the public. Another aspect that was included is an interesting one, and it's an important one, I think. Integrity commissioners now have the power to provide written opinions to members on the code and on Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. This is new. If a member wants a written opinion, the member must request that in writing of the integrity commissioner. So that's a new power, a new responsibility. So the scope, if you will, of the code of conduct has been expanded. But the other thing the province did was, when it made the code mandatory, passed a regulation. And in that regulation, set out specific subject matters that must be included within the code. And municipality meets that test. Council passes the code, by the way. It's a council document. The material in the code, council passes it. Those items, I think there are 5, have to be included. And I'm a big believer that council shouldn't put anything in other than those 5 items. But it's up to council to determine, and the integrity commissioner has the obligation to investigate and report and recommend to council on whatever council has placed in the code itself. I should mention that there is currently a bill before the provincial legislature, and I have to read it. It's Bill 10, and it is, let me read it, the Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act 2022. The Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act 2022. We don't know if this is going to get through before the legislature comes to an end and the election occurs, but what it does is it gives council the authority to ask the integrity commissioner to apply to court to have a member of council removed because of conduct. This will be an interesting piece of legislation if it gets through, and it'll have an impact on some communities. If you look at the City of Ottawa and what they've been going through with respect to one member of council, that's a lot of where this impetus for this legislation came from. So let's talk about conflict of interest just for a few moments, because it's an important area. I should say, if you are thinking of running for council, if you are a one-issue person who wants to get on council to resolve something that's personal to you, I've had people in these sessions over the year who have said, I want to run for council because I own this piece of land and I want to get it developed as quickly as I can. Well, the last place they want to be if they want to develop that land is on council. Because it's pecuniary interest, and we'll see that they are limited in terms of dealing with that sort of thing. And so one-issue candidates sometimes can become very frustrated with all this if they're not able to do the exact thing that they thought they wanted to do when they got elected. So here's a bit of a summary. This act is personal to members of council and committees. It doesn't apply to staff. And it means that council members cannot go to staff to ask for particular advice. In fact, we see now, as I mentioned before, council members can go to their integrity commissioner in writing and get a written opinion on a particular matter. The act talks about pecuniary interest. And this act's been in effect since 1972, hasn't had a lot of changes, and it's always talked about pecuniary interest. And pecuniary means financial. There are a number of different types of pecuniary interest. The direct one's pretty clear. If I own Fred's Widget Shop on Main Street and I want to put in a tender for a supply of widgets to the municipality, when that item came up on the agenda, at the beginning of the agenda, there's a place for declarations. I would say, Your Worship, I want to declare a pecuniary interest on item 4 because I own Fred's Widget Shop. So I've indicated that I have a pecuniary interest, and I've indicated the general nature of it. But there are indirect interests as well, pecuniary interests. They include family, and you should take a look at the scope of that. It's parents, spouse, or children. If their interest is known to you, becomes yours. If you're an employee of a company that's coming to council, in some relationships in terms of members of bodies, that you may have a pecuniary interest. You need to be paying attention. Remember, I said you have to read everything. You need to be paying attention to every item on every agenda, every council meeting and every committee meeting. The declaration has to be verbal, and that's been in the Act since 1972. But the Act was recently changed and said not only must you do a verbal declaration at the meeting, and that declaration ends up in the minutes of the meeting, the clerk will record what you said, but you must now, as a member, also file in writing the declaration. And then the clerk takes the minutes of the meeting, that portion, and takes the written declaration and puts it in a registry. And that registry is available to anyone to look at. So people can look to see if you made a declaration, what you said was proper, or perhaps even looking that you didn't make a declaration in a particular circumstance. So again, this is part of this transparency, the ability of the public to see whether you are acting in an appropriate way as a member of council. The Act also says if you have a pecuniary interest, you can't participate at the meeting when that item is being dealt with, and you can't vote, and that makes sense. But it also goes on to say that you cannot influence before, during, or after the meeting. And that means anytime before and anytime after. And influence has been expanded to include staff. so that you cannot attempt to influence another member of council or any member of staff. It's significant in terms of the obligation. And once you identify them, you have to ensure that you meet all these various elements, the declarations, the not participating, influencing, or voting. I want to mention a book. I should take my business card off it. It's called the Ontario Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, a handbook. And it's published by Municipal World. If you go to the Municipal World website, it's a book. The last I looked, it's under $30. It takes every case since 1972 up to when it was published, that's 2019, and does an analysis of it, and it takes every section of the Act and does an analysis of section of the Act. It's an important read, particularly if you have a business background or you're involved in a number of groups in the community, or your family members are involved in a number of different ways. It's worth reading and getting before the election comes along, because it can really have an impact upon you. So up until a couple of years ago, 3 years ago or so, if a ratepayer, an elector in the community, wanted to complain against a council member because they believed they had a pecuniary interest, their course of action was an application to court at their own expense. Not surprising, that had a limiting effect on people bringing an application. It's expensive. That changed. And now people can apply, and it's not just electors anymore, it's a broader scope of who can apply. Can apply to the integrity commissioner alleging a breach of the Act. And the IC will do an investigation, report to council, but the IC has the ability to bring the application to court. And the court will look at it. By the way, an elector or a person eligible now can also bring it to court. That's still there. Most people, I'm only aware of one circumstance where somebody brought the application directly to court. The court has a broad discretion, anywhere from a reprimand to removing a member from council and keeping them off council for up to 7 years. It's pretty significant. Because of the change in the way people can apply or allege a breach, the number of complaints is up around the province. No surprise. And the cost of all this is borne by the municipality. Cost of the integrity commissioner, the investigation, cost of any court application. So it's becoming a more expensive process in terms of the municipal costs than it used to be on the individual who was bringing the complaint. Let me just mention confidentiality quickly. Members of council carry around with them, either in document form or on computers or in their head, confidential information. Members of council know things about the community that the general public does not know. And that's not surprising as community leaders. As I said before, the code of conduct is required to deal with confidentiality, but beyond that, breaches of confidentiality can cause huge problems for the municipality. It can, one point in Sudbury, there was some consideration by council of suing one of its members because of a breach that cost considerable sum of money. So you need to be cautious as a member of council when you go, if people are going to the coffee shops, much yet sitting with friends or talking with other people in the community or on the internet. Beware of what is confidential and what is not. And that confidentiality extends not only to people, friends and people you meet, but also to family. You need to be cautious about disclosing information that it's inappropriate to divulge. And as it says, as a councillor, you do not speak for the municipality. Let me just talk about Safe Drinking Water Act for just a moment. In 2002, the province enacted this legislation in reaction to Walkerton. At the time this legislation came in, it was considered one of the best safe water protection pieces of legislation in the world. When it brought it in, it did not bring in a section dealing with personal liability of decision makers of a water system. Who are decision makers? Well, we know that's members of council, but it's also senior staff and your water operator. So that section didn't come into effect in terms of personal liability in 2002, but in August of 2012, the province announced at the AMO conference, the Association of Municipalities conference, that that section was coming into effect on January 2013. So we scrambled, the municipal sector scrambled to try and figure out what that meant and what it meant for individual members of council. And there was a lot of training. I had a chance to be part of a lot of that training that was given at that time in terms of what's appropriate conduct for members of council, what questions need to be asked, what do they need to be aware of. January 1st came, and interestingly, about 4 weeks into that new era, a case that had started several years before ended up before the courts. And the chief water operator's municipality in southwestern Ontario was sentenced to jail, a substantial penalty, fine, and sentenced to jail for 30 days. Municipality was fined a substantial fine. I was doing some training at one of the conferences early in February or March, and the mayor of that community was in the room. And he asked me at the break if he could speak to the group, and I said, sure. And he said this. He said, we have been told by our lawyers, municipalities lawyers, and by MOE lawyers that had that section, that personal liability section, been in effect when the charges and the incident originally occurred several years before, all members of council would have been charged. It's important, I think, and I'm telling this not to frighten you off, but to understand that this is a highly regulated area, as many of the things you do as a municipality are highly regulated. There is training that you have to have. You need to understand what your responsibilities are in each of these cases. The other thing is the municipality carries insurance, a number of different policies of insurance that will come into play in all of this. But it's an example of the responsibilities that you will take on as a member of council, if not only with respect to water, but with respect to other things as well. And it's important to be appropriately trained. Around water, it's a matter of health and safety, and the public will have no sympathy for people who are in a situation that they allowed the system to operate in an inappropriate way. So let me sum it up. You need to understand the role you're elected to fulfill. I think that's clear. And you need to understand the role of the roles of other people within the organization. Who's responsible to do what? It's really critical in my experience that be the case. As I said at the outset, municipal powers rest not with individuals, but with the council acting collectively in public. You're not going to be a manager, and if you try to be a manager, you're going to cause problems for your organization if you're elected. Personal obligations, things like the code of conduct, conflict of interest legislation, personal responsibilities around what's in your procedure bylaw. You need to have a sense of what those are about. Talk to your family. Everybody should be aware of what the obligations are, what you're getting into, and take it from there in terms of making a decision to run. And I started off by saying congratulations, and I want to end the same way. If you are considering doing this, I think it's wonderful to consider leadership of the community. It's going to be a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of meetings, and being around municipal offices just consumes you. And it's true for staff, and it's true for members of council. But I've spent a lot of time in local government, and I think it's immediate, and it's powerful, and it has a really strong impact on your community. And I encourage you, if you're considering do it, to act with integrity and with vision, and you'll have, I think, a tremendous 4 years on council. That's it. Maybe we can get rid of this screen. We can stop sharing it, and we can find out if there are any questions.
Thank you. So at this time, if you have a question, you can use your raise hand feature and we'll call upon your screen name. So I'll open the floor to any questions from any of the participants.
Wow, either I was that good or that bad.
Definitely that good. If there are no questions, just a reminder, if you think of something after the fact, please feel free to email those into the clerk's department, either here at the city or to Blind River. We will be posting this presentation to our election website and sharing that with Blind River also, and they can post that to theirs. And if no questions, then I guess I would like to thank you, Fred, for your presentation. Always great to have this information, and I thank everybody for attending today.
Can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
To everyone, if you have election questions around the documentation and things you need to be paying attention to, the person to talk to, the people to talk to are in the clerk's office at each of the municipalities. They are the experts. They know this stuff inside out, and they're there to help you do it. You're doing a great job doing it too. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Thank you all for coming on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I ran out of coffee, so I'm ready to go.